All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney. And today we are fortunate to have our first international guest calling in today from London, I believe. And that would be Fraser Robinson, who's the co-founder and CEO of Beacon. And he's also done a handful of other things in autonomy and self-driving cars and just the sharing economy. And he's just done a bunch of cool stuff. So I'm excited to hear a little bit about Fraser, the person, the professional, and talk a little bit about what he's doing today with Beacon and his other ventures he's got going on. So welcome to the Supply Chaney podcast. Fraser, can you take a second and just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how we got to this conversation today?
Yes, well, great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Nathan. And I'm particularly excited to be your first international guest. That's a real accolade. So I can take
Yeah.
that one and bank it. So
Yep.
look, my journey to supply chain and to Beacon, I think, as with so many people in any line of business, is not a straight line. Far from it. I mean, my career began many years ago in finance. I quickly moved into the tech space in San Francisco back in the 90s. It was a really exciting time to be in that area. Did my first tech startup in the late 90s, and have really been in tech or tech-enabled businesses since then. And I've been in online travel. I've started a B2B sort of SaaS analytics business. I headed up Uber in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I've done a number of things, but I suppose my journey to supply chain, which is really what we're here to talk about, was sparked really during my time at Uber when it became very clear to me at the outset that actually this is really a logistics company. It just happens to be moving warm bodies around, but it's still solving
Yep.
many of those problems. And then a product called Uber Eats was launched, which again is moving warm food around instead of warm bodies.
Yep.
And then while I was at Uber, a product called Uber Freight was launched, which I personally was not involved with, but I had a front row seat. So I think that's where that sort of that germ of interest was born, which led me to where we are today. So that's really, I guess, where that sort of interest was first sparked.
Okay, awesome. Let's take a step back in time a little bit, even further before university days and all that sort of good stuff. And where were you raised? What were you like as a kid? What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
So as you can probably tell, I'm from England. I'm from the UK. So raised here, schooled here. And I suppose my first memory of what I wanted to be when I grew up, I sort of, I suppose when I was about 13 or 14, I was convinced I wanted to go be a doctor, specifically a surgeon. And I don't know how that I did. Nobody in my
Okay.
family is a doctor. There are certainly no surgeons in my family. But I somehow just got the idea and really sort of lived for that for some time. And then as I got older, I think I looked at the sort of the depth of the duration of the educational process that I would need and the grades, quite frankly, that I thought I would need. So I parked that and for my sins got involved in Wall Street instead because I went to America for university. I went to Princeton. So my career really began in the US, even though my upbringing, my education was largely here in the UK. So there's a
I
fork in the
see.
road. So the beginning of my professional career really was in the United States for many years.
I see. When you're not working, there's plenty of time to talk about work and career on this podcast. But what about you as the person today? What do you keep yourself busy with outside of the office?
Well, I have three children aged 13, 11, and 8, and they keep my wife and I extremely busy. They're very sporty, so we
Hmm.
often on the sidelines of some sort of soccer match or
Hmm.
cricket match or athletics. So we spend a lot of time doing that, and it's brilliant fun. So that really is how I spend most of my time. But I'm also athletic. I like tennis and running and walks, and so we're still quite an outdoorsy family.
All right, all right. Well, then, if you brought up tennis, and I was also tennis and golf in school, and so I have to ask most people that I come across on the tennis and ask if you've jumped onto the pickleball bandwagon or if you're staying true to tennis. What
So
side of the net are you on?
very good questions. I've got a couple of things to offer you there. First of all, I have bought a pickleball set, and my children love it. It's actually been a great way, I think, to get them into tennis. Pickleball
Yep.
purists would probably hate that. It's not a stepping stone to tennis. It's a thing in its own right. But it's been wonderful actually to get young children actually to get involved. It's a little bit more straightforward and quite fun. So I have started playing it, and I did. Can't believe I'm about to reveal this. I did invest in a lobster about a year ago, which is a ball machine for tennis.
Okay.
And I have to say, it is seriously good fun just standing there and having tennis balls fired at you at 60 miles an hour. It's good fun.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. I used one a little bit in my trainings. Um, and so is pickleball, well, I don't know, you've maybe spent a little bit of time on both sides of the Atlantic. So do you have
Mm.
a feel for if it's as popular there as it is here in the States, or more so or less so? Do you have any sense of that?
So I well, I don't have, other than what I hear and have been told, I don't personally have a sense for the furor of pickleball in the States. So I'm just taking it as read that it's very popular, but I haven't experienced it myself. But what I would say is that it's definitely catching on here in England, and I know some of the sort of perhaps the more conservative, tennis clubs in England have started to adopt it. So when you see that starting to happen, then
Right.
you
Yep.
know you know it's really starting to take hold. So yeah, I
I
think it's a thing here. I definitely do.
I feel like another metric that you can measure it by is how many tennis courts are getting converted into being pickleball courts, because that's
Yeah, yeah,
actually
yeah.
happening quite a bit.
It's happening. It's happening. Yeah, yeah, for
Yep.
sure. So I think pickleball is definitely on the march. I don't know if it's happening as quickly as in the US, but it's definitely happening. And my
Yeah.
parents play, so
Yeah.
so it's a thing.
It's amazing. I kind of got tired of trying to find matches and people to play tennis with, and so I just kind of went with the pickleball thing because that's where everybody's at, and it's easy to pick up a game and it's fun,
Yeah,
and got
yeah,
my wife involved, and so we play. We'll go and play with people from 18 to 81. Everyone's out on the
yeah.
courts, and so it's a
Exactly.
really inclusive
Mm,
sport.
I agree. That's good fun.
So, also, just I guess briefly, have you lived anywhere else other than the States and the US? Curious.
Gosh, yes, I have. I've lived in Tokyo and Hong Kong, as well
Okay.
as obviously the UK. So I've lived in a couple of places
All
out in
right.
Asia, as well as in the US, which to me is also international. But yeah, I have.
It is. It is, right? Any favorites or any tips for someone? I'm looking to move internationally here in about 5 or 6 years and go and be an expat, I bet. But so any tips or any suggestions on best places to live?
Well, I'm obviously going to put London at the top of the list, and I have lived in New York, and I have lived in San Francisco, and even a stint in Los
Uh,
Angeles. So I really rate London. I think it's a wonderful city, um, and actually, I think depending on what you want to do here, I think Europe is also a wonderful lifestyle. But it really depends on what you want to do. If you want to, you know, set up a hedge fund, I wouldn't recommend, maybe Spain. So I
mhm.
think it just depends on what you want to do. But I think that London is pretty hard to beat because it's you've got commerce, you've got Europe at your doorstep, variety of cultures, and it's really sort of at that crossroads of US and Asia and the Middle East. It's a really exciting part of the world to be in.
For sure. I do appreciate being there in London. I've got some friends there. I'm curious, what would you say is, from your perspective, what is the supply chain center of Europe? Is that London or is it somewhere else?
So it's a very good question. I mean, it's most likely, I think most purists would argue it's probably, one of the big ports in Europe, like a Rotterdam, for example.
Hmm.
It's hard to argue with that just because of the sheer volumes that,
Yeah.
that that they see. So I think that that Europe on the coast there is probably the safe bet. But the UK has a very rich, certainly naval history, and we're a country that at least 80%, if not more, of all goods do come into the country via ocean, or sorry, externally.
Hmm.
So it's a pretty rich culture here. But I think if I had to be really, exacting, I think most people would argue that Europe, particularly those coastal ports, are where the center of European supply chain really is.
Gotcha, gotcha. You mentioned ports, so maybe this is a great transition time to kind of chat through kind of a little bit of your career history and what inspired you maybe to make the transition from the finance world into supply chain. You alluded to it a little bit a while ago, but maybe we can take a little
Mm,
deeper dive into and maybe speak to a little bit of how your pre-supply chain life kind of
mm,
informs and has prepared you, to be a better supply chain
yeah,
practitioner.
yeah. So, I think the obvious place for me to point first is my experience at Uber for sure.
Hmm.
I mean, my tech experience prior to Uber, which spanned sort of B2B SaaS analytics for e-commerce businesses, so that's real bits and bytes rather than atoms. Um, and then even prior to that was in the online travel industry. It was really Uber that opened my eyes to the movement of physical goods, I suppose, in the real world. So
Hmm.
that intersection of technology and physical stuff. So
Right.
that was just interesting, first and foremost, and seeing how technology could solve problems of supply and demand in a marketplace where things are actually moving. A lot of marketplaces are kind of price driven, or there's the supply of goods, but the goods aren't moving. It's not sort of availability of a taxi or a car. It's sort of a marketplace which is buying and selling something, and there's price differentials. So I think that fascinated me first and foremost at Uber, and then it was really the shift to Uber Freight that I think sort of sparked the interest in earnest. And that was because I remember having conversations with the team and sort of just being curious. Tell me more about Uber Freight. Like, what is it? What's going on? And I think it was possibly even Travis or somebody said to me, "Well, it's first of all, it's about an $800 billion or so industry just in the US alone." And that was kind of road haul, And I thought, wow, okay, that's really big. And at Uber, I got used to big things and big
Yeah.
problems, and so
Yeah.
you start to identify and want to look for big things. It becomes a natural muscle that you've developed over time, and you start to
Hmm.
naturally want to gravitate towards those. So that's what was interesting. And then the natural curiosity kicked in. And then you just start reading more and more and wanting to understand how it works. How do the world's goods actually move? What is the process through which that happens? How do companies manage that? And the deeper you get, look, you know this, you're in supply chain. Supply chain is one of those wonderful things that's huge, but completely misunderstood by most people. And it's brushed under the carpet as being this supply chain thing. Oh,
Hmm.
supply chain. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's stuff moving around. But then you start to get into it and you go, wow, there is so much here. And the more I dug and the more I read and the more I thought about all the different problems that exist in supply chain, the more I realized that there was just so much opportunity here, an opportunity that could be impactful and could operate at scale. So that was really what drew me in, I suppose. It was that Uber Freight problem that sparked me. It's not, I mean, that's not what Beacon does, but it's
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
thing that dragged me in. And then there's autonomous vehicles. I was on the board of an
Yep.
autonomous vehicle company. These are all kind of logistics related things, and you just get sucked
Hmm.
into it, and it's inescapably interesting.
So you've spent some time in the marketing world, and you have it looks like that you are a founder of a company that's in the sort of social proof marketing
Yes.
space. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So this goes back quite a few years. I would say it was in the late 2000s, really. I was in the online travel industry,
Hmm.
and we had been sort of pretty early pioneers in the concept of social proof in travel, which is generating interest around products that are selling quickly or are scarce in availability. And, the concept was when you're shopping on the high street, which is our term for kind of Main Street in the UK,
Uh-huh.
people are naturally drawn to busy places or goods that are selling quickly, things that are almost sold out. There's a
Hmm.
natural sort of tendency we have to want to mimic or follow that behavior. Um, the full restaurant is always going to be more interesting than the empty one.
Yeah.
So so we sort of took that concept and applied it in travel, which was an industry that was an early adopter of social proof along the lines of, how many seats are left, how many people are looking at this particular flight right now, how many hotel rooms are left. And the data showed very, very quickly, very evidently how powerful that was in encouraging users to make a purchase decision. And it meaningfully impacted that whole dynamic. And I sort of felt that that would be a nice solution to offer. And remember, you've got to remember, this is back in like 2010, 2011, to offer
Hmm.
that same solution to the plethora of e-commerce businesses that are out there. And thus, it started kind of as an experiment, and it's grown pretty quickly. And now it's become almost site furniture on a lot of businesses. But Tagstar is a business that powers a ton of that technology that customers or shoppers will see when they're on e-commerce sites, both in the US and across Europe. And it's effective at doing its job, which is encouraging people to make a purchase decision quickly.
Hmm. Hmm. What's so that's probably maybe one of, or maybe your first kind of startup that you started yourself.
Yeah.
Can you share any words of wisdom, having gone down that path of starting up something, scaling it, getting it to where you kind of take a little bit of a backseat? Can just any words of wisdoms on that experience?
Yes, I have become a very, very strong advocate of having a co-founder. I
Okay.
did Tagstar on my own. I was a sole founder, and I think particularly if it's your first time, I think it's kind of a lot to take on, and I think that by having a co-founder, as in a marriage, really, you need to have a mirror, somebody
Hmm.
who can talk straight to you about what's a good idea, what isn't, what should we try, what shouldn't we? Because
Yeah.
if you are your only audience, you can get trapped in all sorts of sort of circular conversations that seemingly have no exit, and it's also a lot of work. So I think that's my big lesson, and I would always encourage first-time founders in particular to have a co-founder rather than not. I didn't choose to be a sole founder. I didn't say I don't want one. There just wasn't one available. It just didn't happen that way for me. But in retrospect, I probably would have looked a lot harder to find one, a
I see.
co-founder.
And so did you learn from that lesson, I guess, a little bit when we kind of started thinking about Beacon?
Yeah, for sure. And I'd worked with so many incredible people while I was at Uber, and it's sort of rich pickings, really. You've just got some incredible talent, was and probably still is at that company. But it was a good place, and also the time that I was leaving, the company was sort of transitional at the time, and quite a few of those sort of early starters were sort of leaving. So I was able to zero in on a colleague of mine who I'd worked very closely with, who is my co-founder now. So that was a pretty organic, very natural process, actually.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Speaking of organic, I feel like it's a great transition point to kind of move into talking a little bit more about Beacon and what you all do. And I think a good first question is beyond just saying a little bit about what you do, but can you talk a little bit about your perfect or ideal customer?
Yes, my ideal customer is somebody who works in supply chain for a shipper. So, for example, a retail company or a distributor, what have you. And our ideal user or customer is somebody who is overwhelmed with work, overwhelmed with the amount of information that has to be disseminated to various stakeholders, who is trying to manage the ever-changing nature of supply chain, whether it's delays to shipments, missing documents, updating stakeholders, chasing for information, trying to track down bits of data that are missing, generating reports, trying to extract inefficiencies in a supply chain that you know are there, but you just don't know how to find them. This is our ideal user. These are people who probably work in medium-sized, mid-market and below businesses. Although we do have, enterprise customers, we really think very carefully about the individuals and the problems they have, rather than kind of the big picture company level problems. It's really designed for solving these problems that the individuals have. It's for the overwhelmed, overworked supply chain worker. That's what we are here to solve.
I see. A beacon of hope. Um,
There you
so,
go.
uh, can you talk a little bit about, scrolling through your website and looking at some of the features and offerings? I noticed things like monthly congestion reporting, and also like some heads up stuff for warehouses, and also like some sustainability components and whatnot. I can't imagine that all those that robust feature set all just came straight from day one. Can
No.
you talk a little bit about the journey of kind of what did you start with, and then
Yeah,
how you kind of went about adding on and iterating on that?
definitely. So there's the what do customers need, and then there's the what did we as individuals see as being the sort of the overarching problem. The overarching problem, I think, that we've seen and try to sort of try to unpack, is that most people, most businesses who have a supply chain don't really have good, well-structured data pertaining to their supply chain. And data is sort of philosophically, certainly at Beacon, in our mind, is the answer to most supply chain problems. That is our sort of our core principle, is that if you have data in your supply chain, there are untold problems you can then go and solve. Then you'll be spoilt for which problems do you want to solve first. But most businesses just don't have that data in the first place. They've got a lot of them using spreadsheets. They're not managing the information in a way that makes it useful. Lots of information lives in a Slack channel or in an inbox and emails. There's all this information that's just scattered around. So that is our core principle, is how do we go about gathering that data. But then when you look at the customer, most people in supply chain, they don't go to work in the morning and say, you know what's missing? I really need all of my supply chain data to be structured and organized so that then I can go solve a bunch of problems. That's just not how people think. So with our mission in mind, we then thought very carefully about, okay, what are the immediate challenges that people in supply chains often, and I really mean the kind of the day-to-day sort of,
Hmm.
type problems, because obviously there's a ton of them, like warehousing and inventory and all that stuff. And we sort of identified some sort of quite immediate and high value problems that seemed like obvious ones for us to help solve. And the first one was really what we've called the multi-portal problem. And the multi-portal problem is, you rewind 5 years or more, and everyone goes, well, I would just need to know where my stuff is. But then what happened? That sort of spawned a new problem, which is businesses, use with multiple carriers and forwarders, and then you've suddenly got 10 different portals to log into to try and solve that problem of where your stuff is. Um, and it takes a long time to do that, updating people when things change. These are sort of very laborious tasks to undertake. And when we spoke to early prospects, and we talked about how do they, monitor their goods, how do they know where their stuff is, how do they update customers, how do they update warehouse teams, how do you do all this stuff? And, invariably the answer was usually the same. It was usually, well, we go to carrier.com or forwarder.com and we log in and we have a look. I say, well,
Yeah.
then what do you do? They go, well, then I'll take the ETA and I'll put it in my spreadsheet and I'll update people. And, you know, every time I hear somebody say, well, I go to the carrier portal or the forwarder portal and I do a search there, I sort of, a little piece of me dies because, of course, what you're doing is you're leaving all of your data with the carrier. This is information that belongs to you and that you must keep track of so that you then have some data. Then you can start building this data set of who am I using? How reliable are they? What routes are we taking? Really go back and kind of do something valuable. But if you just go and log into your forwarder or your carrier portal and upload a container number and say, where's my stuff? You get nothing. You might be told an ETA, but you're not getting that store of value which lives in the data. So that was our wedge. That was our entry point, the first problem, if you will, that we decided to solve, to get customers engaged and starting to solve that problem while simultaneously building their supply chain data set, which is so valuable because then you can change carrier, change forwarder, but go wherever you like, but you've got your own wallet of your data and what you've done that you can take with you. So that's where it began. And as you say, it spawns all sorts of other problems you can solve, but you usually need to start with one thing and then go from there rather than try and boil the ocean, and solve everything at once, which never really works.
Yeah. But knowing, kind of just having known you now for about 30 minutes, so give or take, I'm thinking that you were envisioning that this is a massive and big problem to solve. And so even though you
Yes.
may need to start small and kind of figure out how your approach is going to be, eventually it's the supply chain you're trying to fix, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
which is enormous.
Yes. So of course, if you extrapolate out, where we're going with all of this, at the end of the day, I want Beacon to be, God, I'm going to say those dreaded letters, but this predates this, all the excitement. I really want Beacon to become your AI co-pilot. Most people, as you know full well, supply chain management is about managing by exception. It's about sort of handling all of the things that change and can and do go wrong. And what do you do when that happens?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the end game, is for users to be able to just have Beacon as their co-pilot, saying, hey, this is going wrong. Do you want me to change this? Would you like me to let the hauliers know? You might want to think about ordering these goods from this manufacturer sooner because history has shown that they usually produce late and under-deliver on SKUs. Mm-hmm. There's just so many pieces of information that can feed back to what I've often called, ultimately Beacon needs to become a supply chain recommendation engine. Let's call it that rather than the sort of the glossy AI terminology. Okay. It's really a recommendation engine, but for recommendation engines to work, you need the right data. And so, our journey, which will take us to the recommendation engine, the AI, if you will, we're on a journey of helping users bring data into Beacon and get value along the way while we build out that ultimate recommendation for you. Your customers have to go on a journey for you. I think it's very difficult, particularly in the mid-market and below, just to say, install this thing and it's going to run your supply chain for you. I think that's unreasonable to expect any company to just jump on and do that. You need to sort of take them on the journey. So that's really the end game. We did start with that sort of classic multi-portal problem. But once you start to have that data in there, what happened was our customers start to want us to do more things. Like, we really would like to store our documents in Beacon and associate them with shipments, because you know what? I keep all my documents in a shared folder over here, but they're not connected to the shipments, and so on and so on. And once you start getting documents in, then you can start helping to interpret them and send reminders about documents. Then you've got data with carbon. We had a lot of businesses saying, board level initiative, we really need to get our arms around our carbon emissions. Can you help? We go, well, it turns out because we're tracking all of your stuff, we now have all the data to be able to share with you in one place your carbon emissions estimates. So that's a
Mm.
wonderful byproduct. And I don't like to use the term byproduct because it's a primary product, but it's a wonderful byproduct of starting to bring supply chain data together in one place. And so you can see how it starts to build on build on that premise of having supply chain data in the first place. And so tracking is the place we began, which then leads to all sorts of wonderful things. So it grows very quickly. From a problem perspective, you start solving many instead of just that initial one.
I like it. I like it. I appreciate the kind of background on how you've kind of taken that approach to solve, find a problem or obstacle, overcome it, and then go and then
Yeah,
chase the next one.
yeah,
Could you, so many folks I think that I've talked with that are in that are more than a couple of years old as an organization
mm,
that kind of predate whose inception predates AI. It feels like naturally, and they're a data business. They're in the data business. It seems like they've
yes,
all adopted AI to help clean, analyze, make recommendations on that data. Are you in that bucket as well?
yes. So, but as you know, you need lots of data for AI to be sort of super effective. I mean, and I definitely learned this in my days uh, with an autonomous vehicle business. So the quantum of data that's required to make AI effective is a lot. So I think that we take a stepped approach, and I'm always pretty cautious. Maybe it's the English in me, but I try to be realistic about AI, and I think AI really is a journey where you have an AI outcome. But in the short term, I think where we're actually using AI to great effect is to help structure and organize data, and to help call out errors in data, and to help call out, quite frankly, the tons of errors that originate with, for example, carriers or forwarders. The data set that's coming out of the carrier and the port ecosystem is far from perfect. It's still very messy. So we use AI internally for a variety of reasons to help us improve the data quality. But we also use it internally to start to train our own model. We've already launched internally our own sort of AI bot, if you will, which allows us to
Mm-hmm.
query our customers' data internally using an AI in natural language, to start to sort of experiment and see and use ourselves as though we were our customers, to see how
Yeah.
effective that can be at allowing customers to start to interrogate their own data in a more natural way. Um, and that's showing very impressive results so far. So I'm hoping before the end of this year to start exposing some of that to our customers so they can really just start to speak freely with their own data in their existing supply chains and ask it kind of whatever they want.
I'm hearing what you're saying now, and I'm going back to your quote, which I think may be one of the biggest things I take away from this conversation is that the concept of being a recommendation engine,
Yes.
that I think syncs up really well with what I've heard so many people in the space saying, which is that it's not something that's going to take away. I mean, of course, it's going to reduce the number of man hours it takes to do work.
Mm,
But it's more just making the recommendation. At the end of the day, the educated, experienced driver behind the wheel needs to ultimately make the final decision on that data. So
totally.
thanks for sharing that.
Totally.
That was a great nugget.
That's okay. That's my pleasure. And that, but that's also aligned to, you've seen in autonomy as well. You've always got the safety driver there.
Yeah,
Making
yeah.
sure that you're on track. And that those early iterations of our recommendation engine, will be, hey, this has happened. Would you like us to contact the haulier to let them know? Yes or no? So it sort of
Hmm.
empowers the user to kind of make decisions and still be in control, while also helping our AI to learn. Like, what do you like? What does work? What do you want me to do as a recommendation engine? So I think it's I think it's a very natural first step because people are terrified of AI. I don't want you running my supply chain for me. It just we're not
Yeah.
ready. We're not ready. So just make recommendations, and you tell me what you want me, the AI, to do. And I think that's a natural path that we're
Yeah.
seeing already start to work.
I like it. As we wrap up here, maybe a few just standard textbook questions that I try to
Mm,
ask everyone. Um, is there a favorite book that you are reading or that you've read that you would recommend? And or do you have a favorite quote that you would like to deposit here? One or both.
I can
I'll leave it up to
I
you.
can I can take them both. Why not?
All
Favorite
right.
book.
All right.
Um, Well, I like Hemingway a lot, but my favorite book's probably The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and it's not Atlas
Okay.
Shrugged, which I know our sort of more extreme capitalist friends would say that The Fountainhead's a wonderful book about remaining true to your principles and not being
Hmm.
swayed by the noise. So I think that's a wonderful book that I read as a sort of much younger man, which I recommend. It's a great book. Um, the second one, remind me, was quote.
Quote.
I
Yeah.
I'm particular. I'm pretty fond of the quote, and it's not attributed to anyone. I think it's one of those sort of just quotes that's existed for a long time. I've always quite liked the quote.
Uh-huh.
Um, uh, Not wanting something is the same as having it, um, and that's always sort of
Hmm.
resonated with me as I sort of navigate life, and you think about what's important. And I think I even apply it in my role as heading up product, is thinking very carefully about what users want, what they don't want. It's just a nice guiding principle for life, I think, is really just to always ask us, or just remind myself that not wanting something is kind of the same as having it.
That's pretty deep. I'm gonna have to go meditate on that a little bit more
It
later.
takes a while.
Um,
It takes a while. I spent a
yeah.
long time trying to unpack that one. It's interesting once you get into it.
One last one here, and because I interact with a lot of students, and I try
Mm,
to record these conversations in a way that they're easy to understand and learn from. And so the one audience that I try to ask that question for is if you were to go back in time, back to when you were in school, and imagine yourself where you are today. And any words of advice that you would give to yourself to help say, hey, what kind of things should you maybe have done in school differently or could have done to get you to where you are today faster? Or the audience could also be just those students out there today. Any words of advice if they wanted to be like you when they grow up one day?
take more risk. Don't be afraid. Take more risk. You're probably never going to be ready to take the risk that you think you want to take. So hurry up and do it. I think people. I don't know if it's fear driven. I don't know. I can't quite work out what holds people back. But take more risk.
I think that kind of goes. It's one of those quotes that kind of goes unattributed, maybe, which is like, you don't regret the things that you
Yeah,
did, you
it's that
regret the
sort of
things you
thing.
didn't do, sort of thing,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
it's very
Um,
connected to that. Get on and do it. Don't just get on and do it. What are you waiting for? No, because
I
nobody's
like
going to
those.
tell
Those
you
are
you're
great
ready.
parting words today.
Nobody's going to tell you you're ready.
Right,
Only you
right.
can.
And you may not, and so just what is it? It's kind of like feel the fear and do it anyway. um
That's right. I
so
think you'll be very surprised
well,
afterwards.
yes, yes. Well, any parting words here today, kind of to close us out here, Fraser?
No, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Really greatly appreciate your time and giving me the space to prattle on about Beacon's journey and my journey.
Hey, it's been a pleasure learning a little bit about you and your experience and sharing some of your expertise building businesses and solving big problems with us today. I'll catch you around. See you later.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Nathan. See you soon.
Hey, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with Fraser Robinson as much as I did. Just a little bit of summary notes here on the conversation, some takeaways here. firstly, he was the first international guest of the podcast, which was really, really cool. I've had a few folks, from Mexico and Canada on, but he was the first one truly overseas. So that was really special. Also, we talked about how he transitioned from finance into tech, leading Uber's growth in EMEA, and then into autonomous vehicles, and then started up a marketing firm, and then now with Beacon, creating the supply chain visibility platform. Really cool to see that transition that we see so often in entrepreneurs and problem solvers of finding the next big problem to go solve. When we were talking about personal life, he brought up tennis. And of course, I had to ask about pickleball. And we were able to kind of unpack the fact that pickleball is expanding even at the tennis clubs in London. And so that was really fun to hear that it's not just here in Dallas, Texas, that we are putting pickleball courts up everywhere. There was a couple other interesting takeaways, which, like, for example, that they're trying to make Beacon a recommendation engine, and not so much using the label AI like so many folks are, but rather the concept of recommending actions or recommending decisions or recommending suggestions to supply chain operators, and putting the power and the decision making sort of responsibility in the hands of the supply chain expert or an operator. I also liked his advice for young professionals, which is to not be afraid and take more risks, because you're never really going to feel like you're quite ready or prepared for whatever maybe you're contemplating, and to just go for it. And his advice for entrepreneurs was to get a co-founder and not try to do it solo, because it's a big lift, and having someone else there is a tremendous help. And it's kind of like that quote that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? And then lastly, a couple other points here. His favorite book he mentioned was Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And also his favorite quote that he lives by is, not wanting something is the same as having it. I gonna have to take a minute to think through that one a little bit more. So I think it's very profound, but I need to go think about it more. So, well, thanks for joining for this episode with Fraser today. Looking forward to having you along for the next supply chain expert conversation. Hope you got as much out of today's conversation as I did. Thanks for tuning in, and catch you next time.